So she did this for several years. And then she ended up working at a United Church center in the center of Edmonton, which has been doing these ministries for the poor. And she was given, she was in charge of a certain program at one point. And the head of that church agency had really mandated her to do this in a different way from the way in which they normally did business. And I want to get at this point and try and drive it home, and then we can reflect on it in connection with our own church. This agency in the center of Edmonton has done all kinds of good things, but the particular head of it then went on to something else, and they brought in a new person. Who did they bring in? They brought in a woman who had won her stripes in the public system. And when this person found out that our daughter had decided that for the so-called client she had, that the issue was not to record what money they were getting and how they were doing. That is, the issue for her wasn't to spend her time recording that. Her issue was to become their friend. Her issue was to go to their home. Her issue was to take them shopping. Her issue was to take them to the doctor. So she could actually spend time with 8 or 10 people. Substantial time. And live life with them. To what end? Well, my daughter, I think, is just marvelous in this regard. In a sense, she has no expectations of the poor. And I think this is something we need to think about. No expectations of them. It isn't about getting them to another place and then letting go of them. It's about living with them. And what's amazing about that is then some things begin to happen. The person develops a new kind of competence as a result. So it seems to me that the great tragedy of this, Hannah was then fired, actually. But what happened is we're using public money in Canada to fund faith-based organizations who then spend all their time saying that faith doesn't mean much to them. Catholic Social Services, the same thing. Faith doesn't mean much to them. That's what they say to the public funder. To their own base, they say faith is the reason we exist. But if you look at how they function, they mimic the public system. They mimic the public system. Now, my sense is that our funding, I'm happy to pay my taxes, and I happily pay more for this very reason. But the reason we fund faith-based organizations in this society, I would argue, even if we've forgotten it in the civil service and in regulations, the reason we fund them is to have them experiment, to have them do things differently. Now, there's tension around all this. But what other possible reason would we fund them if we didn't want them to try and do things differently and see if maybe they can't find ways to do a better job than our public system does? But the main point that I wanted to make was simply this, and it refers to your comments. The deepest need is always the need for friendship, for walking pathways together, and finding a way to do that. And the public system not only doesn't allow it, it actually prohibits it because it's considered codependent relationships. And so the whole social service system is set up from training on. I don't mean to be too hard on it here, but I'm glad it's there and what have you. But from the training on in social service or social service faculties, through the policy and the way in which these cases are managed, it seems to be done in a way which in the end only serves the professional and only serves a kind of political agenda which allows us to say people aren't dying on the street because they're starving. They're just killing themselves because they're spiritually starving. So the real issue of how to find ways, given the system that exists, how to find ways to enter in and take these people into our lives. Chrysostom, I remember that extraordinary comment of Chrysostom. The origins of the social service system occur at the time of St. John Chrysostom, when the emperor announced one day, some of you may know this, announced one day that inside the walls of Constantinople, they were no longer going to allow people who did not have a permanent address. This is Ralph Klein. I witnessed this just a few years ago with Ralph. And but Ralph's a generous guy. He offered to buy them one-way tickets to Victoria. That's right. And he did. So the emperor said, you have to have a permanent address or you have to get out of the city. Well, Constantinople, to this day, has an enormous street population. So then he turned around, because he was, as a good emperor. He turned around with his left hand and he offered a license to all the bishops to open hostels. And I'm sure what they said about opening the hostel sounds very much like some of the things I've heard in the last couple of days.
Yeah, I'm sure.
We're going to open a hostel because we want to proclaim the Orthodox faith and its unique things to say to this. Well, what are those? That's what I'd like to hear. Tell me what those are. So he gives the license to the bishops to open hostels with his left hand, and he prohibits people on the street with his right hand. So all of a sudden the church develops a whole new infrastructure. And the bishops are happy, they've got new real estate, and the pious are happy, they seem to be doing good work. So what did Chrysostom say that Sunday? It wasn't the first Sunday that he got livid, as we well know, but he spoke directly to the emperor and to his own bishops. And he says, if this proceeds, you will destroy the Christian home. The Christian home. Because the Christian home can only exist where there is a bedroll, a candle, and a loaf of bread waiting for the unseen guest who may knock at your door or who you may meet on your way home. If you can't have somebody come into your home, it is not a Christian home. Well, that's a pretty hard lesson. But the point, I think, is so clear that human beings only get a chance for their to come home to themselves if somebody enjoys them and can enter into some kind of community with them, even if it's tough to do.
Yeah, one of the problems of just creating new institutions and reinstitutionalize people in an institution with a different flag flying over the top of it. And I think it's a serious error for us as Orthodox Christians to start getting involved in this system. And just to carry on the same sort of so-called faith-based. When we talk about a faith-based institution, though, a lot of times we're talking about people that have an agenda. And part of the agenda is to buy people into their church. And that's always the danger of falling into that. And of boasting about our charitableness. One thing that we found in the monastery when people would come with psychiatric illnesses is that so long as they were regularly experiencing the divine services and some kind of peace and some kind of physical beauty around them, that they were able to function in a way they weren't able to function otherwise. And that the divine services themselves and the atmosphere had a great deal to do with their ability to actually function or do things. And we can't